I don't really know if I can do this one. I most certainly don't want to do this one because I'm about to talk about some very heavy stuff and some very awkward stuff. And if I'm being honest, I'd rather not do it. And that's the point. The point is, not enough people are talking about men's mental health. And that is resulting in a very alarming trend of particularly middle-aged men dying by suicide. And I have heard in the past few weeks 3 different stories from 3 different people in 3 different social circles about 3 different middle-aged men who took their own lives. 2 of them were friends of friends. 1 of them was a friend of mine. And I think not talking about it is kind of a dereliction of duty. I do not have a large platform. I do not have a large audience, but I'm hoping that in talking about men's mental health, even to my small audience, maybe I can help in some way offset this alarming trend that we're beginning to see of people my age deciding to take their own lives. And so I'm going to attempt to do that this week. I'm very intimidated by it. And I'm going to begin with a couple of disclaimers, a couple of caveats. Number 1, yeah, I'm going to talk about suicide. And so if that's not something you want to hear about this week, perhaps skip this episode, go back to an earlier episode that you haven't heard yet, or choose a different podcast this week. I get it. Sometimes you just don't want to hear about it, and that's fine. Second disclaimer is I am in no way qualified to talk about this. I am not a medical professional of any sort. I am not a doctor. I am not a therapist. I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a counselor. I am not a social worker. I have no training whatsoever. All I have is my own experience and a sincere heart. So with those disclaimers, with those caveats, I shall attempt to wax semi-eloquent this week about the vitally important topic of men's mental health. I want to give you some numbers. There are all kinds of statistics out there. I mean, this is a thing. Like if you go on the Google and you put in suicide rates among 40-something, 50-something, 60-something-year-old men, you'll find that a lot of people are beginning to talk about this because it's becoming a thing. Over the past, let's say, 15, 20 years in particular, it's become a thing. Men age 45 to 60 who are taking their own lives. Now, we do not say anymore committing suicide. We don't use the word committing or committed anymore. The proper term nowadays is died by suicide. The idea being that using the word committing implies some sort of sinful or some sort of criminal motive behind it all. We're trying to back away from what seems to be accusatory language, so we now say that people died by suicide. Just so I don't say anything wrong. One of the reasons that I didn't want to do this episode is because I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I don't want to come off as though I have some expertise here. I absolutely don't. I absolutely don't. And so it's a bit of a minefield. It's a dangerous topic to wade into. But again, just in the past few weeks, 3 different stories of 3 different men who are roughly my age and who, as far as I could tell, seem to have everything going for them, choosing to end their own lives. And so I feel an obligation to talk about this. I went looking for some numbers. I found quite a wide variety of stuff, but it all points to a pretty consistent general trend. There's an organization online called the Heads Up Group. You can find them. They released a study called Men's Suicide Statistics, where they found that in Canada, where I live, men are responsible for 75% roughly of what they call completed suicides. I know this is macabre. It's important. We need to talk about it. As far as I can tell, men and women attempt roughly the same number of suicides. Men have a much higher what they call completion rate because men tend to choose more violent, fatal, effective methods, and so therefore, quote unquote, complete a higher percentage of suicides. Roughly in Canada, 8 men per day complete a suicide. That adds up to 3,000 or so completed suicides annually. That is a wild statistic, 3,000 men a year. The same group, Heads Up Group, in 2019 reported from their research 1,666,200 men aged 19 or over reported that they had seriously considered suicide in their lifetime. Why do I share that statistic? Well, that's almost 10% of the population reporting that they had seriously considered suicide in their lifetime. I'm sharing that number so that if you're out there and you have seriously considered suicide and you are embarrassed by that, if you feel weak because of that, if you feel alone because of that, I want you to recognize that's 1.5 million other dudes who have also felt that way. And so off the hop, I want you to know that you are not alone. All right. Depression, anxiety, these things are felt by a very, very high percentage of the population, your humble host included. Men have this idea that they have to suffer in some sort of silence, like it's dignified or it's noble to suffer in silence. And as a result of that, there's a temptation or a tendency to feel as though you're the only one. You're the only one who is 52 years old and feeling a deep, dark depression and a deep, dark feeling of hopelessness about the future and powerlessness about the future. And you don't dare tell your buddies about that because they'll do that toxic masculinity thing where they'll just tell you to buck up, or they'll call you a snowflake, or they'll make fun of you for being effeminate or emotional. And so you think you're the only one. And so you hide that inside yourself and it festers and it results in what it results in. Well, I'm here to tell you that there's a study that says 1.5 million men have seriously considered ending their own lives. I mean, that is an extreme level. All right. That's 1.5 million who have thought about going there. Think about the millions of others who have not thought about going there, but have most certainly dealt with or are dealing with depression, anxiety, low feelings, etc. It's a much, much, much higher percentage of the population than you might think. And it's a lot of your friends, I can assure you. I want you to be aware of that, because when we look at the general reasons why men 45 to 60-ish are attempting to end their own lives, the first thing that tends to come up is isolation. There's a wide variety of reasons, okay? Isolation seems to be the first one. Isolation or loneliness. And that tracks because people, particularly I would say in their late 50s, early 60s, in a lot of cases going through pretty heavy-duty life changes. A lot of them retire. Now, you know as well as I do that for a lot of us, the social circle is the office. Well, office is maybe not the right word, but the workplace. A lot of the interactions you have with people, a lot of the friends you have, a lot of the socializing you do is in the workplace. And then people of this age begin to retire, and then that sense of camaraderie, those people, it fades away. You find yourself suddenly isolated. In a lot of cases for men, Your sense of meaning, purpose, value in the world comes from being a provider or contributing in some way to the workplace. You feel like you have value. You feel like you have importance. You feel like your contribution is made in the workplace. And then you retire. And all of a sudden, your social circle might be gone. And your sense of value, what you contribute to the world, is gone. And suddenly you find yourself sitting on the couch alone and without that sense of purpose. That happens as you get into late 50s, early 60s. You might be divorced. Look no further than your humble host to talk about separation in your 50s. It is happening all over the place. And I think that's an upward trend since COVID. Don't quote me on that, but I've read it anecdotally out in the world that COVID contributed to a ton of marriage separations because all of a sudden you were quarantined together, right? You were confined to quarters together. And then those little things that you could ignore by going out into the world or whatever, those things that were festering turned into open wounds. And then people were like, I can't do this anymore. And a lot of marriages separated during the pandemic. Or people realized, man, life is short and they can take away your freedom at any moment, or people die for heinous reasons at any moment. And I don't want to live this way anymore. And we can no longer ignore our unhappiness. And the pandemic seemed to spike that. And so you have a lot of 50-something, 60-something men who are suddenly separating or are divorced. And that brings with it a loss of a life that you thought you were living. It's, for many men, the loss of the one confidant they actually had. Even if your marriage wasn't good, your spouse was kind of the person you couldn't hide from, and probably, in a lot of cases, the rare sympathetic ear that you had. And so suddenly that's gone. We know that divorce/separation can lead to all sorts of financial trouble. Financial stress is the next thing on the list. Those middle-aged men who choose to end their own lives, financial stress is a huge part of it. And divorce leads to enormous financial stress. Maybe you lose your home. Maybe you lose access to your kids. Maybe you are forced to pay alimony. Maybe you have lost half of your pension, half of whatever it is. It leads to enormous, for a lot of men, financial stress. And so here you may be dealing with isolation, loss of income, loss of kids, loss of home, a wide variety of stuff piling up. Those of us who are in our 50s are beginning to be in a lot of pain. Your humble host is once again having a back flare up right now. As we get older, particularly, I think there's a really alarming trend of people 75 and up who are taking their own lives. I treat that somewhat differently than the 45 to 60-year-old group. 75 and up, for example, I had a great uncle. He was in his 80s. Great guy. Life of the party. Very, very interesting and unique cat. Took his own life at 85. Was that a desperation move? Was that a depression thing? I don't think so. I think he was 85 and he was beginning to have health problems, and he could very clearly see in the not too distant future a very, very difficult end, and chose to exit on his own terms. It's the same thing as people who use MAID, the MAID service, medical assistance in dying, dealing with a chronic illness, dealing with a chronic disease, dealing with what's going to be an horrendous end, and choosing instead the easier, more dignified way out. I have no problem with that. In fact, I'm delighted. I'm very pleased that I live in a culture that has that kind of mercy available to people, that kind of dignity available to people. Some people choose MAID. My great uncle was sort of a no-nonsense old school cat. He chose a different way out, but I kind of get that. I don't see that as a depressive or desperation move at 85. I just see it as choosing to end on his own terms. I find that different. But there are people 50s, 60s who are beginning to experience chronic disease, beginning to experience chronic pain, and it contributes to a depression. And that is a contributing factor to choosing to end your own life. And of course, there is, for men, this masculinity thing that we all grow up with. This boys don't cry thing, this stiff upper lip thing, this tough it out, Part of the man's job is to make the sacrifices and to tough it out and to not be a burden on people, right? So men have this weird nobility where some of them choose to suffer in silence because that's what a man does. A man's job is to sacrifice for his family. And so if he's in pain, if he is depressed, if he is anxious, you don't put that on your people. Now you suck that up and you hold on to it and you internalize it. And that's the masculine thing to do, quote unquote. And being a burden to your family, or at least perceiving yourself as a burden to your family, is the least masculine thing possible. And so you bottle that up. You just eat that. And you think you're doing some noble thing by bottling that up. But the problem is, eventually it pops. Eventually it pops, usually in destructive ways. One of those ways can be a decision to take your own life so as to not have to deal with the burden anymore, so as to not have to deal with the pain anymore. And they call that in their own mind nobility. And okay, this is the problem I have with this list of reasons why middle-aged men seem to be taking their own lives, is that there's a couple of them. A, everybody is different. I'm sure that this list, isolation, financial pressure, chronic pain or illness, untreated mental health problems that have existed their whole life. I mean, man, this is what I'm talking about. Men not having the conversation with their doctor, with their friends, with their spouse, whatever. Men not having mental illness treated. I was the same way, by the way. It was many years ago that I was dealing with depression, and I talked to a doctor about it, and that doctor recommended therapy, and I said no. As a young, dumb man, it's like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to express that weakness. And the doctor, who was a woman, coincidentally, said, why? Just didn't understand at all why I would have this aversion to seeking therapy. But, I was indoctrinated too. Men don't do that. Men suffer in silence. This is our weird masculine nobility. So I even, in the early days, wouldn't have my mental health issue treated because it was easier or more noble to pretend I didn't have one, knowing full well that I was leaning towards depression, that I was leaning towards anxiety. But oh no, we're not going to treat that. And this is a weird thing that men adopt. Men, we don't seek that out. And it's one of the major reasons why we explode later. So a lot of that could be avoided if we just were willing to have our dark thoughts treated. But everybody is different. Every story is different. Every circumstance is different. Everybody is different. So I have trouble with the list of reasons why middle-aged men seem to be taking their own lives, because I know it doesn't apply to everyone, although some of these factors will apply in some way to every case. They aren't definitive. Everybody is different. Every circumstance is different. Everybody's perception is different. Everybody's dealing with, they may be related, but different variations of problems. There is no one-size-fits-all reason for this. There is no one-size-fits-all solution for this. So it's very hard for me to talk in general terms about it. The other thing I know, which creates a problem, is that when you are in the throes of a depression, when you are in the throes of anxiety, you are not yourself. I've talked about this before on the podcast, and I'll tell you now that one of the reasons that I've talked so much about my own anxiety issues is this. I am trying in my own small way to spark the conversation, or at least make the conversation okay. at least allow the conversation among men about, in my case, anxiety, about, in my case, depression. My experience of anxiety, which peaked during COVID. I've talked at length about how I popped during the pandemic, and I spent the better part of 2020 sitting in my backyard shaking. And I was not in my own mind. I was not in my right mind. But you don't know that at the time. One of the reasons I think it's very difficult, once people have reached a level where taking your own life is on the table, I can't help. I mean, my purpose in doing this episode is to catch you before you get there, to try to make this conversation okay before you get there. Because once you get there, I don't think there's anything I can do really to help. I'm certainly not qualified. I'm trying to catch you before you get there. But I know from my own experience of anxiety, from my own experience of depression, that when you are in the throes of an anxious episode, when you are in the throes of a depressive episode, you are not yourself. I mean, whatever it is, that anxiety, it's like a possession. It takes you over. Now, at the peak of COVID and at the peak of my own anxiety, I know for a fact that I was not in control. The anxiety, the fear was in control. And I knew this subjectively, but emotionally, I couldn't pull out of it. I was just walking around terrified all the time, even though I could rationalize, and this is the part that drives people crazy. You can rationalize with somebody who is depressed. You can rationalize with somebody who is anxious, but it does no good because their rational mind is not in control. You are not talking to their rational mind, right? You are talking to the depression. You are talking to the anxiety, and the depression and the anxiety do not see things in a rational way. I have said before that anxiety is this belief that your worst fears are happening or are imminent. And some reptilian part of you takes over for the purposes of self-preservation in that moment. It is not your rational mind. The problem is that in a lot of cases, you don't know that your rational mind is not in control until it is. Well, this is the experience that I had. Now, COVID 2020, I am sitting in my backyard shaking most of the time because I am an empath and I absorbed the fear and anger of the world, and it blew up in the form of me taking on everybody's fear and feeling as though it's imminent. Whatever the worst thing is for me, for you, whatever, it was all imminent. And so I'm in the backyard shaking and I don't know what to do about it. I didn't realize that the anxiety had taken control of my brain and my body until I went out into the world and lockdown lifted at some point, and my friend group had a little party. And so 20 of us got together and we drank wine and we played cards and whatever. And it was like, hey, you don't notice there's a noise running in the background until the noise goes away. And then you're like, wait, there was a noise running before. So it was with me and the anxiety. I got out of fake reality. The anxiety was fake reality, right? My greatest fears are occurring or imminent, and I'm on hypervigilance watching for them. Into real reality, which was, oh, actually, we're pretty safe. And my friends are here, and we're all having a good time. And real reality is far safer than the fake reality that the anxiety had painted for me. You don't know that your depression has taken control until it lifts in some way, until the fever breaks. It's like having a gallbladder attack, if you've ever had one. When that lifts, everything is so much different. Everything is so much better. And you can't rationalize with somebody who's in a depressive state because they're probably not even aware that their depression has taken total control of their perception. What they think, what they feel is being utterly projected and perceived by this depression. And you can't rationalize. Well, you can't point out all of the things that are great. You can't go to a depressed person and point out all of the reasons why they shouldn't be depressed. They're just not hearing it. They're not seeing it. And pointing it out to them doesn't tend to do any good because their rational mind is not in control. And this is the problem. You can't negotiate, generally speaking, with depression. You can't negotiate with anxiety. it's really, really tricky. And I'm not qualified to tell you what to do about that. I can only try to make the point to you. If you're dealing with somebody who's depressive, if you're dealing with somebody who's anxious, and you're beating your head against a wall because they won't hear what you're saying, it's because it's not them. It's the depression. It is the anxiety. Depression pulls you into a hole. Depression pulls you into a world that you just feel like you can't get out of. You pointed all these specific reasons why, generally speaking, middle-aged men tend to be taking their own lives. For me, it boils down to a feeling of hopelessness and a feeling of a loss of control. You lost your job, you lost your spouse, you lost your house, you lost your income, you lost your purpose, you lost all of these things. You're out of control. Like, a lot of people get overwhelmed by this wide variety of circumstances that can just bubble up. And they don't know what to do about it. They don't know how to deal with that, or they feel as though they've lost control. And then you reach a certain age, and it's not difficult to lose your sense of hope as well. When you're 30 and maybe you lose your job, or even you lose your spouse, you say, well, I'm 30 and I got lots of time to fix this, change it, do things differently. You don't tend to lose your hope so easily. You're 60 and you lose those things and you're like, I don't have a whole lot of time left. I don't think I can correct this. I don't know if I have the strength to do it. You begin to lose your hope. And you begin to lose your sense of control. Now, we all know we don't have all that much control anyways in the grand scheme of life. Take a look at what's going on in the world. There's a lot that you can't control. But we tend to hold on to this illusion of control. As you get older and you begin to see a lot of that control slip away, it's very easy to become anxious or to become depressed, to lose your sense of hope. And I think that's what it boils down to, this sort of overwhelm and this idea that the overwhelm can't be fixed. I'm here to tell you that that's not true, but if you are a depressive leaning person, if you are an anxious leaning person, losing this control, losing this sense of hope just invites the depression and the anxiety in, and it takes you over. And so you begin to do things that are not your rational mind. You begin to do things that are driven by this depression, driven by this sense of hopelessness, driven by this sense of losing control. And if you are inclined that way, you can begin to see taking your own life as the only way out. It's the only way to solve these problems that have come into your life. And I swear, it's not the rational mind talking in a lot of cases. It's the depression talking. It is the anxiety talking. And it is like a possession. It takes you over. And it can be insidious, and it can happen in ways that you don't even see it happening. And then all of a sudden it's just there. And you don't even know it until, mercifully, if it happens, it lifts in some way. You go to a party and then you realize that screaming noise in the background isn't there anymore. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm back into real reality. I'm back into this place of rational mind where I'm in control again. And I can see that all of these fears that have possessed me are in fact not happening or are not imminent. And I don't have to worry about these things or all these things that were making me depressed. It is like a gallbladder attack lifting. I have had depressive moments. I have had depressive episodes, and you can't tell me anything in those periods. You can't rationalize anything in those periods. You can tell me all the wonderful things in my life, and then the depression says I don't deserve any of those things. The depression says those things won't last. Those things are not going to leave me. Or the depression says, yeah, but look at all this awful stuff. And you are just possessed. It's not your rational mind. And it's so bloody difficult. If you're a person who is dealing with a depressive person, it's easy to become frustrated because you can look objectively at their lives and say, well, these are all of the wonderful reasons for you to be alive. You've got these 3 wonderful kids, or you've got this hobby you love so much, or you've got your spouse, or you've got whatever it is. You're financially stable. You may have lost your income, but you're okay for now. There's reasons to have hope. And they fall on deaf ears because a depressed person doesn't want to hear it, because the depression doesn't want to hear it, or the anxiety can't hear it. And it can be enormously frustrating to deal with that. And once people reach a level where taking your own life is on the table, you're just talking in many cases to a brick wall. It's very, very difficult. You can't really intervene in a rational way. And that's when you need professional help. That's when you need emergency medical services, possibly. It's beyond your powers to rationalize in many cases, or at least you need a very well-trained person to do that. That's not me. I'm just trying to give, for those of you who are lucky enough to not have anxiety, to not have depression, this is what it's like being on the inside. It is not rational. It is a possession, and you can't, generally speaking, talk a person out of it unless you are super well trained and experienced to do that. I'm free-forming a lot of this, and so I've probably lost my train of thought. I guess the point is hopelessness and a loss of control. I think those are the big contributing factors. And if you are prone to depression or prone to anxiety, those things will blow it up. And that depression and that anxiety can possess you. It can just take you over. And then there are other things. People have chemical imbalances. People have genetic stuff going on where their minds just doesn't necessarily work in a rational way or can be thrown off kilter. That's why people need SSRIs. That's why people need medication, because it helps to regulate those things. I'm not qualified to speak on that, but I understand why those things exist, and I know why they help a lot of people. But you're not dealing, generally speaking, with a rational person, especially if they've reached a point where this is on the table and this is an option for them. The thing is, men out there, we need to help each other not get there. We need to begin having the conversation. I've said before on this podcast that I was talking to somebody one time about when my anxiety really began. It wasn't during COVID. It's when I was working for the local police force, and I was in the media office, and I was all of a sudden surrounded every day by crime and danger. We had the police scanner running in the media office. We had local news channel running on the departmental television set, which is just an endless ticker of crime. All I was reporting on was crime. All that came across my office desk was crime. Everything that was going on was crime. The neighborhood that the police station is located in was infested with crime. It was everywhere. And I was not used to that. I was not used to seeing my city in that way. Now, I am prone to depression. I am prone to anxiety. I am prone to fear. And so the latent anxiety that lived in me began to explode during my time working in that position because I was suddenly surrounded by crime. And so my worldview became very small. All of a sudden, driving down the street, everybody I saw was a potential criminal. Everywhere I looked was a potential site of a crime happening. I began to feel as though the world were nothing but crime and danger, which is not true. Crime and danger is a very small, minuscule percentage of the world, but when you are immersed in it, it becomes your whole worldview. And if you are inclined towards anxiety and fear the way I am, that becomes really, really powerful. And so I began really to pop then. That was a couple of years before COVID, but I did have a panic attack. All right. I did have a panic episode during that time. It's the first and only real panic attack I've ever had. It was horrendous. I was savvy enough and self-aware enough to understand what was happening. I was able to breathe through it, but it was a bloody, scary moment. That's when I began to realize what was in me, what the potential was in me. And it was very, very scary indeed. Now, I remember telling somebody about that many years later, and his answer was, "Suck it up, princess." It was a joke. It was not meant to be mean, but in a lot of cases, that is the male discourse about this. You confess to somebody that you've had a panic attack, and the answer is, "Suck it up, princess." And that's the problem. All right. And so we need men to have this conversation, because a lot of you are hiding your depression. A lot of you are hiding your anxiety for fear that revealing it will get you an answer like, suck it up, princess. Now, a lot of men feel as though they don't measure up. This is another thing that has been cited in the literature about middle-aged men taking their own lives. A lot of men play this comparison game where they get to their 50s and they're like, life was supposed to turn out in such a way, and I haven't got there. I haven't got the house that I was promised. I may be separated from my spouse, or I lost my kids, or I didn't have them at all. I don't have the income that I thought I was going to have. I don't have the job that I thought I was going to have. And I look around and all of my friends seem to be rich dudes with wives or girlfriends or kids, driving nice cars, living in nice houses, seem to have it all together. And I'm not happy and I'm not successful. And men play this comparison game. And so you develop this feeling of inadequacy, especially in the social media world where so many people present the idealized version of their lives. And then they're all surprised when that perfect marriage breaks down. Well, yeah, it's been breaking down all along. They're just not presenting that way. But you're seeing this image presented of a perfect life, and you don't measure up by comparison. Now, a lot of men, especially as they reach this age in their 50s where they're supposed to have accomplished the goals and done the thing and be financially free, Freedom 55. Remember that lie that they spread to us? Remember that marketing campaign? Then you get to 52, 53, and you're like, I'm going to have to work for friggin' ever. But all of my friends seem to have figured it out, but they haven't, kids. They haven't figured it out. They're just presenting as though they have. A lot of men are afraid to reveal to other men that they're scared, or that they're not successful, or that they feel as though they're not successful, or that their marriage isn't that good, or that their relationship with their kids isn't that good. They're afraid to reveal that they're frightened or that they're depressed because A, they may get the suck it up princess response, or they may feel as though they're inadequate for having those feelings. Because look at all their friends. Their friends seem to have it all together, and why don't they? And then they feel in some way inferior. Well, I just read you the statistics. 1.5 million men, 19 and over, who have seriously considered suicide in their lifetimes. You're not alone, all right? And I think it's important. It's one of the reasons that I talk about anxiety on this show. It's one of the reasons I'm doing this episode, is that we need to begin having these conversations now, before it's too late, before the depression, before the anxiety takes a person to a point where they're actually seriously considering this. In a lot of cases, it's already too late. So we need to start talking about this now. So, dudes, I want you to pay attention. When you're out there with your other dudes, A, if somebody expresses to you a sadness, a depression, an anxiety, I don't want you to say, suck it up, princess, okay? Better to say nothing at all than to say something like that, or to berate or attack another man who is expressing this to you so as to, I don't know what, protect your own fragile feelings, protect your own feeling of inadequacy, protect your own toxic manhood. Don't do that. Somebody presents to you and says, look, I'm not doing that well. I'm not happy. Listen. All you got to do is listen. All you got to do is say, tell me more about that. You don't have to confess your own fear, but listen. And you don't have to solve anybody's problems either. Just start by listening. Start, if you have it in you, by asking the friggin' question. You know, there are signs to watch for that I found out in my travels too, in contemplating this question of middle-aged men committing suicide. Not committing suicide, dying by suicide. See, I have to learn the new language as well. I have to learn the new perceptions as well. So if you've got a friend who seems to be withdrawing from your circle, withdrawing from your pickleball group, withdrawing from the poker group, whatever, withdrawing from going to the hockey game, pay attention to that. If you have a friend who is expressing feelings of being a burden or expressing feelings of hopelessness. Don't turn away from that. Pay frigging attention to that. Listen to that. If you have a friend who seems to be losing interest in his or her too, hobbies or routine. Now, I know I have expressed a lot on this show lately that I'm having trouble playing the drums. I'm having trouble making this podcast. That is not depression talking, all right? That is just me not so much feeling it anymore. Sometimes things just run through their cycle and that's it, right? Sometimes you get to the end of something and that's fine. You move on to something else. It's a different thing, all right? You can tell the difference. You see somebody who's just not interested in doing stuff anymore. That's a red flag, okay? If you see somebody beginning to neglect personal hygiene, that's an interesting one. It's like, man, he's looking rough these days. Like he's not taking care of himself at all, or not taking meds, or just not looking after his or her health anymore. If you notice your buddy is just increasingly irritable and angry in ways that are noticeable to you, one of the things I discovered in my travels is that men tend not to express sadness. If you run into a dude who has sadness, a lot of times that doesn't come out as sadness, but as irritability or anger. It's like your happy-go-lucky friend is not presenting as sad, but God, he's pissed all the time. Or he's really short, or he's not himself. I suppose it wraps up into he's not himself. Frigging pay attention to that. If you have a friend who seems to be suddenly giving away a lot of stuff, or seems to be talking about or enacting putting his financial house in order, taking care of finances, giving stuff away, that can be a clue that they're making a plan to make life easier on the other side for whoever is left, so that they're not such a burden again. If you hear somebody talking about being hopeless, or things being hopeless, or things being not worth it, now sometimes people are just talking, right? Sometimes people are just having a moment, but you can tell. Now, you can tell if there's a layer to that. Somebody talking about things being hopeless or pointless. You can tell if that's just a momentary grumble and they're just getting it off their chest. You can also tell if that's something deeply rooted. And if it feels deeply rooted to you, ask the damn question. Are you okay? It's a simple question, 3 words. Are you okay? And listen to the friggin' answer. And then, of course, if you have a friend who's suddenly really abusing substances, that's the other warning sign. Doing a lot of drinking, perhaps doing a lot of drugs, doing what seems to be self-medicating but self-destructive things. These are all big clues, man. These are all big clues, but dudes are not having the conversation. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this right now. I am willing to be a princess and begin having the conversation. I am willing to say, yes, I have had depression. Yes, I have suffered from crippling anxiety. No, it's not frigging fun. And so if it's you are out there right now with feelings of depression, with feelings of anxiety, and you don't know what to do about it. I am not qualified to tell you what to do about it. I am not a therapist. I can tell you what's helped me in terms of mental health, what has helped me. And first and foremost on my list is therapy. I told you, like 15 years ago, I was speaking to a doctor and therapy came up and I said, no way. Oh, I don't need that. And I eschewed that for many years. Eventually, I did finally go to therapy. It was not for depression. It was not for anxiety. I went to therapy because I was just having trouble sorting out my own thoughts. I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. I didn't know what my purpose was. And I wanted to go in and talk to somebody to help me kind of unravel my own beliefs, unravel my own perceptions. A lot of the time, we can't see our own blocks, right? We don't know what holds us back from going after what we want or even knowing what we want. We don't know why we can't seem to find a relationship. We don't know why we can't hold on to one. We don't know stuff about ourselves. And so I went to therapy out of a curiosity about myself. Now, yes, I've had depressive tendencies. Yes, I have had anxiety, and I know that there's a lot of psychology involved in that. And so I was hoping in the process of just kind of understanding my own psychology, understanding my own blocks, that I would also be able to deal with some of this stuff. I didn't go into therapy because of depression. So if you're one of these people who's like, I can't go to therapy because people will think I'm depressed, I'm giving you a nice, solid excuse, okay? Tell people you went into therapy because you wanted to figure out some of your own blocks, all right? This is a positive thing. This is self-awareness. This is self-knowledge. This is personal growth. Thank God I went to therapy. Started in, I think, 2018, because when the anxiety popped in 2020, I already had a 2-year relationship with a therapist. And she was enormously helpful in getting me through that. She's been enormously helpful in helping me talk out some of the stuff in my own life that has contributed to the way I see things, the way I perceive things, and the stuff that I believe about myself in the world. This kind of self-awareness is friggin' gold, man. So if you have depressive tendencies, if you have a tend towards anxiety, go get therapy. There is no shame in therapy. And if you feel shame in therapy, tell people you're there to figure out your own blocks. All right? Call it self-awareness. You don't have to tell people, if you don't want to, that you're going because you have anxiety and depression. You can get therapy for free. It exists in Ontario where I live. Ask your doctor for a referral to a therapist who is covered by OHIP. If you are part of a family health team in Ontario, you have access to qualified social workers. Make an appointment, sit down with a social worker, and talk about what you are feeling. And then take a referral from there. Talk to your frigging doctor. Talk to your clergy person. Talk to somebody. All right? There are online services. There's BetterHelp. There is 988 is the Suicide Crisis Hotline. All right, if it gets that far, we can stop it getting that far. If you talk to somebody before then, all right? The second thing I learned, which has been so enormously helpful for my anxiety, and this is going to not work for everybody, but for me, it was learning to surrender. All right, I chose a spiritual path. Anxiety is about control. Anxiety is about the loss of control. And then I began to realize through the pandemic, I treated my anxiety episode during the pandemic as really a call to a spiritual life and a call to surrender. That is not a religious life. That is not Christianity. It is not anything. It was me surrendering to the notion that there is just something beyond us. You can call that the field. You can call that the universe. You can call it God, if that's the language you want to use. Spirit, whatever it is. I had to learn to let go of my need to control. Anxiety is your greatest fears are occurring or imminent, and you can't do anything about it. That's what really gets you with the anxiety. You can't do anything about it. You are not in control of the situation. And so I had to learn to lay control of the situation into something beyond myself. That may not be easy for you. It was not easy for me. I grew up in evangelical Christianity, and I have still deep-rooted resentment and reactions to that. And so giving it over to God, coming from the world that I came from with such resentment, not easy to do, but I don't talk about it in those terms anymore. I don't use that language anymore. As I was having the anxiety, I had to give it up. I had to surrender it to whatever is the power that is beyond me. And I've worked very hard over the past, it's been longer than 6 years, but particularly the last 6 years, to cultivate this sense of a spiritual existence. That has taken me into Taoism. That has taken me into Buddhism. It has even taken me in some ways back into Christianity as a method of understanding our place in a spiritual world. I gave my anxiety over. I know that sounds quaint and trite. It was not as easy as I'm making it sound, and I still struggle every day. I still struggle every damn day with giving over, surrendering to circumstance, having faith in the way things are. But if you can get there, one of the great antidotes to depression, one of the great antidotes to anxiety is being able to surrender it, to simply surrender to the flow of life. I lost my job and I'm scared as hell and I'm feeling like less of a man, and you can't control that. But can you let it go? Can you surrender it? Can you look at that and say something really wonderful can come of this? And I'm giving over control of this situation, and with the faith that something good will come of it. I know. I know how hard that is in circumstances. Okay. I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about this, but this is a very robust and muscular thing to do. Learning to let go. And I've had to, especially in the past year and a half, over and over and over and over again, learn to surrender difficult circumstances, to give them up. And I have found resolutely in every case that an answer came, that a solution came, that something came in the end that helped solve it. I've had examples just in the past couple of weeks of things falling into place in the most immaculate timing when I let go of the need to control them. Right? This is a challenging one. Therapy is very practical. There are steps to therapy. You can follow them. Learning this spirituality, learning to surrender the problems in life, the stresses in life, and then even harder, developing the faith to know that they're going to be okay. That's a tougher one. Now, that is a tougher one to do, and it's very individual. Everybody has to come to that in their own way. I'm lucky enough to work with a therapist who also is doing shamanic training. So I'm getting both sides. I'm getting the academic and the spiritual side. I'm lucky that way. Begin to follow spiritual teaching. Go online, go onto YouTube, find Jeff Thompson, GeoffThompson. If you want practical, proven spiritual advice, strategy, go there. And this dude was, for many happy years, a bouncer in one of the most violent cities, Coventry, England, and one of the most violent clubs in the 1980s that you could find in Europe. All right. This is a dude. If what you need is street, if what you need is street credibility and masculinity, this is a guy who spent 10 years of his life kicking the teeth out of people's heads, out of his own fear, out of his own ego. And he came to a spirituality. And if you want, his podcast episodes are getting to be like 10 years old now, but no less relevant. If you need muscular spirituality, if you need street cred, go find Jeff Thompson on YouTube and just begin to listen to what he talks about with ancient wisdom, spirituality, ego, and you can receive a lot of instruction. You can receive a lot of balm from that. For me, during my deepest, darkest, depressive episodes, the anxiety, it was Ram Dass. Just listening to his voice, developing, cultivating a spiritual connection and a faith has been probably the most important factor for me in learning to let go of some of these burdens that we hold on to, let go of some of these problems that we hold on to. If you can cultivate a personal and effective spirituality, it will go a very long way, all right? Get into real reality. That's a story I just told about being in the throes of anxiety and not even realizing that I was possessed until I went to a party with my friends and was pulled back into real reality, where my fears are not happening, where my fears are not imminent, where in fact we're actually pretty okay. Go out. Socialize, be with people. If you are depressed, I know it's the hardest friggin' thing. Your depression doesn't want to go be with people. Your depression wants to wallow. Your depression wants to be self-pitying. That's how it feeds itself, but it is in possession of your mind and body. Go out with people. Go back into real reality. It is a very powerful and effective way to lift, particularly moments of depression. It may not solve your chronic depression, but if you're having an incident, if you're having an episode, go out, or at least have people come in. Be with people, right? If you're isolated, find communities. Find communities around your hobby. Go play euchre at the Legion. Join a cornhole league. Sometimes you have to take a step. Your depression doesn't want you to take a step. Sometimes you have to override that. Get back into real reality as a way of lifting yourself out of this fake reality that depression puts you in or anxiety puts you in. If you are overwhelmed with problems, if you are overwhelmed with stuff you can't sort out, don't take it all at once. Right? Try to break your problems down into bite-sized, manageable things. The way you exert control again is to focus on one thing. I was overwhelmed a couple summers ago when we were doing the renovation in one level of this house. There came a moment where the whole level had basically been ripped out and it was just a mess everywhere. We had ripped out a bunch of stuff, drywall, whatever, and the place was a mess. The two rooms, the floor was a complete mess. And I had a mini meltdown because I was in way over my, I don't know anything about this. I was trusting contractors. I was trusting people to do this for me, but it had just begun and I didn't know the steps and I didn't know how to do this. I'd never done a renovation before. And I walked into a room that was just a chaos of bits of drywall and paper and garbage and what, it was just a chaos in this space. And I had a mini meltdown. I was in over my head. I didn't know how to do this. And I was scared. And the way to deal with that, the way to cope was to say, okay, I can't control the timeline of when this gets done. I can't control the steps of how this gets done. What I can control is the mess in this room. And so I simply set about cleaning up some of the stuff, restoring what order I could to the space. That was a proactive move. That was a way of exerting some small control. So if you're in a position right now of complete overwhelm, take a look specifically at what the problems are. Which ones can you reasonably solve or at least do something productive about? And one at a time, begin to do something about them. Don't try to take the whole picture at once. That's the overwhelm and you feel hopeless. It's like, I can't deal with this and you collapse. But can you deal with one small piece of it? Can you get your taxes done? Can you start with that? Can you clean up this space that needs cleaning? Can you call the person you need to call to schedule fixing this? The more proactive steps you take, the more sense of control that you begin to reestablish. And then all of a sudden, you're doing productive things and you begin to feel, you men, like you're taking charge of the situation. But you can't do it all at once. So focus in, micro-focus. Okay, I can deal with this right now. Today, we're going to do these 5 things. All right, we're going to take steps here, 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 here. And it doesn't solve all of the problems, but suddenly begin to work from a more productive headspace. And maybe you get a couple of wins and you're like, okay, all right, we're reestablishing order here. We're reestablishing balance. Exercise. For God's sakes, exercise. It's not even about getting in shape, although that's a nice side effect. Endorphins. It's about control. And there have been times when I've been on the road, and so much of the time when you're on the road, you have no control at all. Now, you've got van call, you've got setup time, you've got sound check time, you've got to be here, 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 and here. You're not in control whatsoever. And there have been times where that becomes a problem. It becomes, you're away from home, you're tired, there's a lot of stuff that begins to weigh on you. And it's like spending 45 minutes at the gym, just of your own volition, is again reasserting control. It's like, I am taking a proactive step for me. Right? I am going to the gym and I'm going to exercise. That is, again, bringing control to an uncontrollable situation. So do that and get the endorphins and get the little bit of high and get yourself a little bit in shape and then feel as though you're doing something for yourself. All right. That's a very important step, an easy one and an important one. Turn off the frigging news. Start right now. The news is at the best of times. The news is designed to incite fear and a sense of danger. We've talked before. If it bleeds, it leads. All right. They always come at you with the worst stuff first because we are wired to watch for threat, and news knows that. And these days, the news, especially if you are prone to anxiety and fear a loss of control, the news is not going to help you these days, my friends. What's happening in the States, what's happening in the world, unchecked apparently, and the fear mongering that surrounds it and the fear projections that surround it, that is not going to help your anxiety. Stay informed if you must. Get off of social media. Get off of where fear is what's promoted. Fear, anger. It's all promoted on social media. It's all promoted by the algorithm because it gets the most engagement. Anger gets the most engagement. If you are already trending towards a feeling of hopelessness, and then you pull up the news or you pull up social media and you see the forces that seem to be taking over with impunity and doing such horrific, heinous things, of course you're going to pop. It's just like me working for the cops, being surrounded by crime all the time. It skews your perception of the world to feel as though everywhere is danger, when in fact it isn't, but that becomes your worldview. So if you are dealing with a depression, if you are dealing with anxiety, get away from the news, get away from social media, right? Clear that out of your consciousness. Focus on positive things. At least focus on soothing things. You know, if you must be on YouTube, watch Jeff Thompson. Don't watch some angry person screaming about liberals or screaming about MAGA or anything like that. Just stay away from that discourse. It's not helpful for you. And the last little thing that's helped me as I have dealt with anxiety, as I have dealt with depression, is to try to turn that outward and serve someone else. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to do when the depression or the anxiety is taken over. But helping or serving somebody else is such a really wonderful way of shifting that energy. Even paying somebody else a compliment, doing something nice for somebody else takes the focus off of you and puts it elsewhere. It gets you thinking about serving. It gets you thinking about acts of kindness. It gets you thinking about the positive things that you can bring into the world, especially if you're a person who feels like a burden or feels like a failure or feels like you're just a drain on other people, which is always your depression talking and always your anxiety talking. You shift that and you serve somebody else, it begins pulling more of a positive momentum into your life. It is the antidote to hopelessness to serve somebody else. I'm doing that right now, hopefully serving somebody out there by talking about some of this stuff, by being vulnerable, by being honest about my own experience. That's an act of service. And it can be something as simple as buying coffee for whoever's next in line or who knows what. So do that. If nothing else, provide some service or some kindness to somebody else. But dudes, look, we got to start talking about this. So next time you're with your boys, and especially if you have one of your boys who you just feel like something's not right, if you feel like something's not right, ask the damn question, are you okay? And if they try to come at you with weird toxic masculinity stuff, be man enough to take it. Right? Because I think that's true masculinity. And one of the things I've noticed, my friend who took his own life, I've heard some of the dialogue around that, and I'm a little bit surprised because there's been quite a bit of anger expressed. Not just anger that my friend would do that and leave behind the pain that is left behind, but in many cases, anger that people didn't know that he was struggling and anger that they didn't have a chance to help. They didn't help because they didn't know, right? And so one of the ways to know is to simply ask the question, are you doing okay? And listen to the frigging answer, right? It's so important that we open up this way. And if some guy comes to you and expresses an anxiety or expresses a depression, expresses a sadness, expresses a feeling of hopelessness, be empathetic. Put aside the BS toxic masculinity that we have grown up with and simply listen. Sometimes that's all people want, is just to listen and know that they're not alone. Know that they're not the only one. It's when we suffer in this silence that the depression mutates, that the anxiety grows like a cancer, and it possesses you and it takes over. And we know that men can do rash things. It's one of the reasons why they're so eminently more successful at completing than women are, because they'll do extreme, irrational things that get the job done. And if they suffer in silence, they're far more likely to end that way. And it doesn't have to be that way. If men stop being dicks about being alpha males and start listening like mature, rational adults, I think that can go a long way. So have the conversation, all right. This is getting to be very, very long. I didn't intend it to be. I didn't even think I could do it at all. And so I hope you've found some use in it. Pay attention, folks. Pay attention to the people around you, and don't be afraid to ask the simple question, are you okay? And if you're a person who's struggling with this stuff, I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want you to know that help is available. And I want you to know that there are ways around this, all right? 988 is the Suicide Crisis Hotline in Canada, and I think the States. Talk to your doctor. Find a therapist. And from my own experience, it's not as bad as you think it is most of the time. There are ways to reframe your perception. There are ways to come out of this. And there is a solution, I would argue, to pretty much every possible problem. And people are willing to help you find it. So please be open to that help if you find it, all right? I don't know what else to say. Perhaps I said too much already. I hope you are okay. And if you're not, please tell somebody you're not, even if it's just to call 988 and talk to a stranger who is trained to help you. There are reasons to keep living, all right? And there are wonderful, wonderful experiences that you can have. And I don't want to say any more because it's going to come off as trite. So I hope this episode was useful for you. And if you listened this far, thank you very, very much. And I will come back next week, hopefully with something just a little bit lighter to help us all through. Thanks for listening.